In the vast expanse of space, there stood a magnificent palace unlike any other. The palace belonged to an alien race that valued knowledge, art, and tradition. At the heart of this palace was the throne room of the alien queen, a wise and noble leader. She was known not only for her strength, but also for her kindness and understanding. The palace was built with elegant silver towers that reached high into the starry sky. The walls were a deep blue, echoing the calm of a quiet ocean. Large, shimmering windows allowed soft light to filter into the grand halls. The floors were smooth and polished, reflecting the beauty of the ornate designs carved into the stone. Every piece of the palace told a story of the ancient heritage and modern progress of her people. In the throne room, the queen sat on a raised platform. Her throne was made of crystal and metal, a symbol of the unity between tradition and innovation. The room was filled with a gentle hum of energy that seemed to pulse with life. Guards and advisors moved quietly through the corridors, each carrying out their duties with care and respect. The atmosphere was peaceful, yet it was filled with a sense of purpose. The queen herself was a striking figure. Her eyes held the wisdom of many ages, and her gentle smile spoke of compassion. She was a ruler who cared deeply for her subjects and for the future of her world. Despite the many challenges she faced, she always maintained a calm and steady presence. Her leadership was a beacon of hope in a time of change. Throughout the palace, art and history blended together. Ancient tapestries hung on the walls, and futuristic sculptures caught the eye of every visitor. There were statues that honored past heroes and paintings that celebrated new ideas. This mix of old and new made the palace a living museum, where the lessons of the past met the dreams of tomorrow. In this regal domain, every corner was a reminder of the queen's dedication to her people. The palace was more than just a home. It was a symbol of unity and progress. Here, tradition was cherished and innovation was encouraged. The queen's presence was a calming force, bringing balance to the bustling activity of the palace. As the day began, the soft glow of dawn filled the palace. The queen rose from her seat with grace, ready to meet the challenges of the new day. Her heart was filled with hope, and her mind was clear. In this moment, in the quiet beauty of her domain, the queen knew that she had the strength to guide her people towards a bright future. Every brick and beam told a story of past glories and future dreams. The calm sound of soft footsteps and gentle music filled the air. In this place of honor and hope, every heart felt united under the queen's kind rule, bringing endless promise. In the quiet morning light, the palace corridors came alive with gentle sounds. The palace, with its smooth stone floors and wide, sparkling windows, was a place where history and modern life met. Today, a new presence stirred the calm. A human guard named John had arrived. John was not like the other palace workers. He came from a far-off world, and his arrival was a sign of new hope and change. John walked slowly along the polished marble floor, his steps light and careful. He wore a simple uniform that marked him as a guard and a messenger of his people. Although he was human, he carried with him an air of calm determination. His eyes showed kindness, and his face was open, as if he held many stories of his own world. Many had heard of the great human spirit, and here he was, standing among beings from another star. The palace dwellers, busy with their tasks, paused to watch this unusual newcomer. His presence was a quiet reminder of the alliance that was slowly growing between different worlds. The human guard was welcomed by the palace staff with respectful nods and friendly smiles. Even the smallest details in the palace, from the intricate carvings on the walls to the soft hum of distant music, seemed to brighten at his arrival. John was led through long, winding halls filled with art and history. He passed statues of past heroes and ancient paintings that told the story of the alien people. His eyes moved slowly over each piece, taking in the beauty and the deep meaning behind every work. He listened carefully as a guide explained the significance of the relics and the traditions that had been passed down through the ages. Every word filled him with a sense of wonder about the people he now served. At last, John reached a grand chamber where many important decisions were made. The room was vast, with a high ceiling and walls that shimmered with delicate patterns. It was here that the alien queen often met with her most trusted advisors. Though John was there as a guard, his role was not only to watch over the palace. His presence was also a symbol of the strong, resilient spirit that humans were known for, a spirit that valued truth, honor, and friendship. As he stood quietly at his post, John could feel the eyes of the palace upon him. He did not feel nervous. Instead, he felt proud. He had come to serve in a place where two worlds met, and he was ready to prove that his kind was as brave and thoughtful as any other. His simple words and calm actions told a story of hope and unity. The human guard's arrival was more than a duty. It was a promise of a future where differences would come together to create something greater. In that moment, as the light of dawn filled the chamber, the palace knew that change had come quietly through the gentle footsteps of a man from another world. In the quiet of the palace, Queen Meryl sat by a large window, watching the busy halls below. Her heart beat slowly as she focused on one particular figure, a human guard named John. As he moved through the corridors, something about him caught her eye. His gentle smile and steady gaze reminded her of a man she had once loved deeply. The resemblance was so clear that it sent a shiver down her spine. For many years, Queen Meryl had ruled her people with strength and wisdom. Yet, beneath her calm exterior lay memories of a past love with her ex-husband, a noble warrior of her own kind. His warm eyes and kind manner had once filled her life with light. When she saw John, every detail of his face and the way he carried himself stirred those old memories. It was as if a part of her past had come back to life. John walked with a quiet determination. His steps were measured, and his eyes, full of kindness, took in the beauty of the palace. He greeted the staff with a soft word and a nod, unaware that his every move was a reminder of a lost love to the queen. In that moment, the palace, with its shining floors and elegant architecture, seemed to hold its breath. The light from the window danced on the walls, and for a brief second, time felt as if it had slowed down. Queen Meryl felt a mix of emotions. There was a spark of joy that reminded her of the happy days with her ex-husband, days filled with laughter and gentle conversations. But there was also a deep sadness, a quiet ache for what she had lost. The echo of those old days was clear in John's features, yet she knew he was not the same man. He was a new person, a human guard, sent to serve her people. His presence was a sign of the growing bond between their worlds, a bond that filled her with both hope and uncertainty. As the day passed, the queen found herself watching John from afar. She noted how he paused to help a younger guard lift a heavy object, and how he listened carefully to the words of his colleagues. His simple acts of kindness and duty shone through in every gesture. With each movement, the resemblance to her past became stronger, stirring feelings she had long tried to keep hidden. Deep in her private chambers, Queen Meryl allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She thought of the love she once shared and the dreams they had built together. Now, of seeing John, she wondered if fate was offering her a chance to heal old wounds, or if the resemblance was merely a cruel reminder of what was lost. Even as the palace continued its daily routine, the queen's mind was filled with thoughts of the past. John's presence, simple yet profound, had awakened memories and emotions that could not be easily ignored. In that silent space between duty and desire, the uncanny resemblance grew into a small bright spark, one that might light the way to a new beginning or deepen the shadows of old regrets. Queen Meryl sat on her grand throne, her expression calm and unreadable. The shimmering light of the palace cast soft shadows around her, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept returning to the human guard, John. Every time she saw him, a strange feeling settled in her chest, like a whisper from the past. The resemblance between him and her ex-husband was too strong to ignore. She had faced many challenges as queen: wars, diplomacy, betrayal, but nothing had shaken her like this. She had spent years locking away the memories of her lost love, focusing only on ruling her people. But now, in the presence of a man who looked so much like him, those memories refused to stay hidden. As John stood near the entrance of the throne room, his posture straight and disciplined, Meryl found herself studying him again. His strong jawline, the way his eyes carried both warmth and quiet strength, it was all too familiar. She clenched her hands together, trying to steady herself. This was not the same man. This was a human, not one of her kind. Yet, her heart did not seem to care about logic. A soft voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Your Majesty, is everything all right?" It was her royal advisor, Tyron, who had noticed the distant look in her eyes. Meryl took a slow breath and nodded. "Yes," she answered, though even she was not sure if it was the truth. John remained unaware of the storm inside the Queen's mind. He had been assigned as part of the palace security team, and he took his job seriously. As he stood at his post, he observed the grand throne room with quiet admiration. The place was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Majestic, ancient, filled with history. He felt honored to be among such a powerful and wise people. Yet he could not ignore the way the Queen looked at him. He had noticed her gaze lingering on him more than once. He did not understand why, but something about her stare felt heavy, almost like she was looking at someone else when she saw him. Myrtle's mind raced with questions. Why did fate bring this man to her palace? Was it a test, a reminder, or something else entirely? She needed to speak with him. She needed to know if this resemblance was merely coincidence or if the universe had something planned. The Queen finally rose from her throne. Her flowing robes shimmered as she stepped forward. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "Guard," she spoke, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "Come forward." John stiffened at the sudden command but obeyed immediately, stepping toward the Queen with respect. His heartbeat quickened. What did she want with him? As their eyes met, a strange tension filled the air. The past and present seemed to collide, leaving both of them standing at the edge of something neither could yet understand. John stepped forward, his boots making a soft sound against the smooth palace floor. He kept his posture straight, his expression calm, but inside, he was filled with curiosity. The Queen had just called him forward, and he had no idea why. Queen Meryl stood tall, her regal presence commanding respect. Yet, behind her calm exterior, her thoughts were in turmoil. As John stopped a few steps away from her throne, she studied his face closely. Every small detail, the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes held quiet determination, reminded her of the man she had once loved. It was unsettling. She finally spoke. "What is your name, human?" John's voice was steady. "John Carter, Your Majesty. I am honored to serve in your palace." The Queen nodded slowly. His name was unfamiliar, yet the sound of his voice stirred something deep within her. She glanced at her advisor, Tyron, who stood nearby, watching with careful eyes. "Where are you from, John Carter?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I come from Earth," he replied. "A world far from here, but one that seeks peace and unity with other civilizations." The way he spoke, calm, respectful, with quiet confidence, was another reminder of her past. She turned slightly, gazing out of the large window beside her throne. The stars twinkled in the distance, endless and mysterious. "Tell me," she continued, "why did you choose to serve here, in my palace?" John hesitated for a moment. He could feel the weight of her gaze, though he didn't understand the reason behind it. "I wanted to prove that humans are capable of more than just survival. We build, we protect, and we stand by those who trust us. I believe that by serving here, I can be part of something greater." Queen Meryl felt a strange emotion rise in her chest. His words were different, but the meaning behind them was the same as something her ex-husband had once told her. A promise to protect, to serve, to stand with her people. She took a deep breath. "You are different from others I have met," she admitted, her voice softer now. "Humans are known for their resilience, but there is something else in you." John frowned slightly. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, have I done something to trouble you?" The queen's eyes met his again. For a moment, she considered telling him the truth, that he looked like the man who once held her heart. But she held back. It was not the right time. "No," she finally said. "You have done nothing wrong." John gave a respectful nod. "Then I will continue to serve with loyalty, Your Majesty." His words, spoken with quiet strength, made something inside her waver. She had built walls around her heart for years. But this human, this stranger, was shaking them without even realizing it. As John stepped back to his position, the queen sat down, her thoughts no longer as clear as before. Queen Myrrel sat silently on her throne, her thoughts tangled in the past. The resemblance between John Carter and her ex-husband was too strong to ignore. It was not just his face, but his mannerisms, his calm strength, the way he stood with quiet confidence. The universe had a strange way of playing with fate, and now she found herself trapped between memory and reality. She needed answers. As the day faded into evening, the palace corridors grew quieter. The soft glow of floating lanterns lit the halls as the queen walked with slow, measured steps. She was not alone. Tyron, her trusted advisor, walked beside her, his sharp eyes watching her carefully. "You have been troubled since you saw the human guard," Tyron said gently. "He reminds you of him, doesn't he?" Myrrel sighed, stopping near a tall window. The stars outside seemed endless, their cold beauty reflecting the emotions swirling inside her. "Yes," she admitted. "It is as if I am seeing the shadow of the past. But he is not the same. He cannot be." Tyron nodded. "And yet, you cannot ignore this feeling." Myrrel turned away from the window. "I must know if this is mere coincidence, or if fate is testing me." She paused, then added, "Arrange for John Carter to meet me privately." Tyron bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Later that night, John was summoned to a quiet chamber deep within the palace. The room was smaller than the grand halls he had seen before, but its beauty was undeniable. The walls were covered in tapestries woven with golden thread, and the soft light of crystal lamps cast a peaceful glow. John stood at attention, waiting for the queen to arrive. His mind raced with questions. Why had she called for him? Had he made a mistake? Was he being tested? The doors slid open with a quiet hum, and Queen Myrrel stepped inside. She wore a flowing robe of deep blue, her presence regal yet calm. She did not speak right away. Instead, she studied him closely, her piercing eyes searching for something. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "John Carter, do you believe in fate?" John blinked at the unexpected question, but answered truthfully. "I believe we make our own paths, but sometimes life leads us to places we never expected." Myrrel's lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. Wise words. She took a slow breath before continuing. "You remind me of someone I once knew, someone important." John remained silent, sensing the weight of her words. "I do not know why the universe has brought you here," Myrrel admitted, her voice quieter now. "But I intend to find out." John nodded. "Then I will answer whatever questions you have, Your Majesty." For the first time in years, Queen Myrrel felt the walls around her heart tremble. The past was no longer something she could ignore. It had returned, standing right before her in the form of a human guard. The chamber was silent, except for the soft hum of energy from the glowing crystal lamps. John stood calmly, waiting for the queen to speak. His training as a guard had prepared him for many things: combat, discipline, diplomacy. But this moment was different. He could feel the weight of something unspoken in the air. Queen Myrrel sat on a cushioned seat, her gaze locked onto him. The resemblance still unsettled her, but she was no longer afraid of it. Instead, she was determined to understand why fate had placed this human before her. "Sit," she said softly, motioning to the seat across from her. John hesitated for a second before obeying. He had never expected to have a personal conversation with the queen herself. He straightened his posture, his hands resting on his knees, waiting for her to continue. "You remind me of someone I once loved," Myrrel said finally, her voice steady but quiet. My ex-husband. John blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected such a direct statement. He had noticed her staring at him before, but he had never imagined this was the reason. I see, he replied carefully. I'm not sure what to say, Your Majesty. Myrtle studied his expression, searching for something. Tell me about your past, John Carter. Where do you come from? What kind of man are you? John took a slow breath before answering. I was born on Earth, in a city surrounded by mountains. My family was simple, hard-working people. I joined the security force to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. I believe in duty, in doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Myrtle's lips pressed together. The words were different, but the meaning behind them was painfully familiar. Her ex-husband had spoken the same way, about honor, duty, and protecting others. The realization made her heart tighten. She leaned forward slightly. Have you ever lost someone important to you? John's face darkened for a moment. He nodded. Yes, a close friend. He was like a brother to me. We fought side by side, but in the end, I couldn't save him. Myrtle inhaled sharply, the way his voice wavered slightly, the pain in his eyes. She had seen that same expression before, long ago. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time, her voice held something more than just formality. It held understanding. John nodded in thanks but did not speak. He simply met her gaze, and in that moment, a silent connection passed between them. Two souls, shaped by duty and loss, yet still standing. Myrtle exhaled slowly. Perhaps the universe has brought us together for a reason. John Carter. John gave a small smile. Perhaps it has, Your Majesty. For the first time in years, Queen Myrtle felt something she thought she had lost. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, the past had not returned to haunt her, but to heal her. You said. Queen Myrtle sat quietly after her conversation with John. His words echoed in her mind, stirring emotion she had buried long ago. His honesty, his pain, and his sense of duty reminded her so much of her ex-husband that it almost felt like fate was playing a trick on her. But she was not one to believe in mere coincidences. As the night deepened, Myrtle walked alone through the palace gardens. The cool air brushed against her skin, and the scent of rare flowers filled the space around her. The stars above shone brightly, just as they had the night she had last spoken with her ex-husband. Memories flooded her mind. His laughter, his strong presence, the way he had promised to protect her no matter what. And then, the painful goodbye. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had spent years locking those feelings away, convincing herself that she had moved on. But now, standing under the same stars, after speaking with John Carter, she realized something. She had never truly let go. Meanwhile, John stood at his post near the palace entrance. He had spoken to many leaders before, but none had left him as puzzled as Queen Myrtle. She was powerful yet kind, firm yet vulnerable. There was something about her gaze that made him feel as if she saw more in him than just a simple guard. He couldn't deny that he, too, felt something unusual. He had served in many places, faced many dangers, but never had he been looked at the way Queen Myrtle looked at him. It wasn't suspicion or curiosity. It was something deeper, something he didn't yet understand. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. John Carter. He turned to see Queen Myrtle approaching, her royal robes flowing behind her. He immediately straightened. Your Majesty. She studied him for a moment before speaking. Walk with me. John hesitated but then nodded. Together, they strolled through the quiet gardens. The path was lined with glowing stones, casting a soft light around them. The air was peaceful, yet John could feel the weight of unspoken words between them. After a while, Myrtle finally broke the silence. Do you believe that the past shapes who we are? John thought for a moment before answering. Yes, the past teaches us lessons, but it's up to us to decide what we do with them. Myrtle nodded slowly. I have spent years convincing myself that my past was behind me. But now, after meeting you, I realize that some things never truly fade. John glanced at her, unsure of what to say. Your Majesty, I don't know why I remind you of someone, but I am just myself, nothing more. Myrtle gave him a small smile. And yet, that is enough. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Maybe John wasn't here to replace the past. Maybe he was here to help her finally move forward. In the days that followed, Queen Myrtle began to see the palace through a different lens. The familiar halls and statues that once only spoke of her people's history now seemed to tell a broader story. John Carter had brought something new into her world, not just in his strange, human way of thinking, but in how he interacted with everyone around him. His steady presence, his sense of purpose, and his quiet resilience were changing the dynamics in subtle yet meaningful ways. The palace guards had initially viewed him with mild curiosity, unsure of what to make of a human in their ranks. But as time passed, they began to respect him. John was always willing to lend a hand, whether it was assisting a fellow guard with a heavy load or sharing his insights on improving security procedures. His approach was never forceful or condescending. Instead, he asked questions, listened carefully, and offered practical solutions. Even the royal advisors, who were known for their cautious, tradition-bound nature, started to take note. They noticed that John had a way of addressing problems that was refreshingly straightforward. Where they would spend hours debating protocol, John would suggest a simple, effective course of action. His perspective reminded them that sometimes the best solutions weren't the most complicated. For Queen Myrtle, watching these subtle shifts brought both relief and renewed determination. Her initial unease around John, her struggle with his uncanny resemblance to her ex-husband, had softened. Now, she began to see him not as a reminder of her past, but as a bridge to a stronger future. One morning, as sunlight poured into the palace's main council chamber, Myrtle called a special meeting. Her advisors and high-ranking officials gathered around the long table, their expressions curious and expectant. John stood near the entrance, quietly observing. The Queen addressed the room. "It is time for us to strengthen our alliance with Earth." Her voice was calm but firm. "In John Carter, we have seen the qualities that make humanity unique. Their ingenuity, their resilience, and their ability to work alongside us have proven that our differences can be our greatest strength." There was a moment of quiet surprise. The advisors exchanged glances, weighing her words. Tyron, her trusted advisor, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, do you believe we are ready to take such a step?" Myrtle nodded. "We have held on to tradition for many generations, but the galaxy is changing. If we remain isolated, we risk losing our place in the greater community. Working with Earth is not just about diplomacy. It is about growing stronger together." John felt a swell of pride as he listened. He had not come here to change their ways, yet his presence had shown them something valuable. It wasn't about one person's actions, but about the way humans and aliens could find common ground, even in the smallest interactions. The Queen's declaration was met with cautious agreement. For the first time in years, the palace felt alive with possibility. A new chapter was beginning, one built on cooperation and mutual respect. As Myrtle looked toward the future, she realized that while her past had shaped her, it was the present and the alliances they forged that would define her people's legacy. "You said." Queen Myrtle stood at the balcony of her palace, overlooking the bustling city below. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink as the sun dipped toward the horizon. For the first time in many years, she felt a sense of clarity and calm. The recent changes in the palace, sparked by John Carter's presence, had left an undeniable mark. The once rigid traditions of her people now seemed more open, more willing to embrace new ideas. John had shown them not just how to cooperate, but how to trust. And through his quiet strength, he had reminded Myrtle of something she had forgotten long ago, that progress required courage, and that healing often began with a single step forward. John himself stood quietly in the background, ever watchful and composed. He had no desire for attention or recognition. He simply performed his duties with diligence, and that had been enough to inspire change. Myrtle turned to him and spoke, her voice gentle. "John Carter, do you know what you have done here?" He looked at her with a calm expression. "I've only done what I thought was right, Your Majesty." She smiled faintly. Sometimes that is all it takes. A simple act of doing what is right can set something greater in motion. You've helped us see that our strength lies not just in tradition, but in our willingness to grow. John nodded. "Your people are strong, Your Majesty. They have the wisdom of the past and the vision to shape the future. I'm glad to have played a small part." Myrtle stepped closer, her gaze steady. "It was not a small part. You've reminded me of who I once was, and who I can still become. For that, I owe you my thanks." The two stood in quiet reflection for a moment, the sounds of the city rising gently to meet them. The past few weeks had been filled with challenges, but also with hope. Through their conversations and the subtle shifts in the palace's culture, a foundation for a new alliance had been laid. Myrtle knew that her people would always honor their traditions, but now she also knew that they could adapt, learn, and create a future that honored both their heritage and their newfound friendship with Earth. It was a delicate balance, but one worth striving for. As the sun finally set, Myrtle turned to John one last time. "The path ahead will not always be easy, but together, I believe we can navigate it." John gave a small smile. "I believe that too, Your Majesty." In that quiet moment under the deepening twilight, a new chapter began, not just for the Queen and her people, but for the bond between their worlds. And in her heart, Myrtle felt a sense of renewal. The past would always be a part of her, but now it no longer weighed her down. It had become a guide, helping her walk boldly into a brighter future.